Let me say this about the title of the article. The editor at the American Spectator switched the title I put on the article and the title that was the original title of the article much more clearly explains what the article is about. The title originally was How Limited Was Limited Government Meant to Be?
Makes sense.
In other words, going back to the founding, what kind of government did the founders believe they were establishing, hope they were establishing? And there are two other questions that I answer in the article, and that is, when did we first go amiss? When did we first expand beyond the limits that the founders meant to impose? And how did we get from that day to this? When did we first go amiss? How did we get from that day to this? And in the course of this conversation, I believe I will answer those three questions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. I've had this guest on our show now 3 times. He should be very familiar to you. He's Dr. Jerome Huyler, and he is a PhD. He's a scholar. He's an educator. He's an author, and he's a man who understands the American government and many, many, many of its failings. He is not ashamed to speak out about it. As a matter of fact, he's on the show today because last week I picked up an article which he was instrumental in, and he sent me a copy of it nicely, and it's published in the American Spectator. And the article is labeled "The Limited Government We Don't Have." Today, our government is surrounded by special interest lobbyists seeking special privileges. Seems that this whole government is wrapped up in what's for me? How about me? How about me? Yep. Jerry, welcome to the show. And once again, I will ask you publicly, out of respect for your title, may I call you Jerry rather than Professor?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So welcome back to the show. You have been on the show now 3 times, and each time you do, we get wonderful feedback. People are they love to hear what you have to say because you surely have a handle on what's going on. So let's begin with the article, and then we'll break a little way away from it because you and I chatted a little bit before we began the show on what's going on in this country. Okay?
So let me say this about the title of the article. The editor at the American Spectator switched the title I put on the article and the title that was the original title of the article much more clearly explains what the article is about. The title originally was How Limited Was Limited Government Meant to Be?
Makes sense.
In other words, going back to the founding, what kind of government did the founders believe they were establishing, hope they were establishing? And there are two other questions that I answer in the article, and that is, when did we first go amiss? When did we first expand beyond the limits that the founders meant to impose? And how did we get from that day to this? When did we first go amiss? How did we get from that day to this? And in the course of this conversation, I believe I will answer those 3 questions.
I am eager to hear it. I read the article and I didn't recognize your first question that you posed because it's in the first paragraph of the article. It said, you say here, how limited was limited government meant to be? You know,
that's what the article is about.
But now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to point out that we are now in a society that every couple of months they tell you how many new jobs are filled in this country. And I've been watching very closely over the last few months. And it seems to me it's kind of erroneous because every time they post the numbers of new jobs, they forget to tell you that about 1/3 of them are for the government. These people are being hired by the government, and the government is swelling bigger and bigger and bigger until it's certainly uncontrollable. So, Jerry, I'm going to leave you to talk about your points there. I know that wasn't what you wanted to talk about. You wanted to talk about limited power and limited control. And certainly they're taking it all away from us, one step at a time. So I'm going to leave you to explain your questions and give us answers.
The first thing to acknowledge is that there is a preamble to the Constitution, and that is the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution in the preamble says the purpose is, quote, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. The blessings of liberty refer to the principles that Thomas Jefferson wrote into the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence is very much the law of the land, as is the Constitution, of course. All my life, I've been told by my college teachers that the Declaration is just a statement of sentiments. Only the Constitution is the law of the land. Well, if you look at it the way I do, you realize that the Declaration establishing what liberty means, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is very much a part of the Constitution to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Now, what does the Declaration mean? What does it say? And what does it say about government? Well, it begins, all men are created equal. All men are created equal. What does that mean? Jefferson followed John Locke in two of Locke's principles that are very important. And that is that there is, quote, there is nothing more evident than that creatures promiscuously born to the same advantages of nature and use of the same faculties should be equal one amongst another without subjection or subordination. We are all free to think, to say, and to do as we please. In Locke's terms, quote, to order our actions and dispose of our possessions as we think fit within the bounds of the law of nature. What is the law of nature? It is that all men are created equal. Locke wrote, again, in quotes, the state of nature, before there was a government at all, has a law of nature to govern it. And reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who but consult it that being all equal and independent, no one may harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions, unquote. That is the fundamental statement of equality and an equal liberty with which all men and women are born. If all men and women are created equal, government has no authority to pick winners and losers.
Which
We're
is
all equal.
which it's commonly doing now all the time.
Which
Go ahead.
is all government does. 75% of what government does
Sure.
is benefit some organized interests at the expense of
Of
others.
another, right.
Now, here's my main point. Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Does that mean the governed may do anything they please? Absolutely not. Since no one has a right to take away or give away what belongs to another, government may not attain authority to pick winners and losers, to take away and give away what belongs to some to others. And yet that is exactly what government is doing. That is the most important point I can make, that the governed are limited in the powers they can confer on their government,
Right.
as no one has a right to take away or give away what belongs to another. They cannot confer a power to redistribute income, earnings, wealth from some people to others.
Certainly. You can't bestow what's not yours to bestow. Absolutely. I understand.
In other words, government must be a protector, not a provider.
Right.
That's the fundamental distinction. Why? Because no one is entitled to anything someone else has to pay for. Otherwise, we're not equal.
That's
Some
right.
people are going to pay and some people are going to get,
Right.
and there's no longer equality. When did government first become a provider? When did it first go amiss, in other words? The origins of the American welfare state can be traced to the second bill signed into law by our first president. The Tariff Act of 1789 allowed Congress to pick winners and losers. Who were the winners? They were the domestic manufacturers who would now be protected from foreign competition by the higher tariff duties that were imposed. Across the 19th century, those tariffs grew higher and higher and higher. Who paid the price? Farmers and planters, who had to pay artificially higher prices for the tools, the textiles, the utensils, the machinery they had to purchase. Worse than that, because as a result of these progressively higher taxes, which amounts to corporate welfare, England and France and Scotland and Holland did not accumulate the foreign exchange to buy the agricultural products, especially the cotton and the wheat that Southern farmers wanted to sell. So there was terrible circumstances for our farmers all across the 19th century, through a lot of it.
So then their produce was in lesser demand, and so could not justify and ask for appropriate prices.
Yep. That was it.
Okay.
Now, also, after the tariff was the second bill signed by the first president. But after that, there were a national bank, there were state-chartered banks that benefited the financial interests of the country, again, eventually at the expense of depositors after the banks went bankrupt, or inflation just ate up the value of everyone's money. And most of all, there were subsidies, grants of cash and land grants given to turnpike road companies, canal companies, and eventually railroad companies like the Transcontinental Railroad. They were getting huge, massive subsidies for every mile of track they built. So again, corporate welfare was run amok. How did we get from that day to this? Here's the principle. Once the nation decided that some of its citizens had a right not to go out and get, but to lobby Congress and be given, the country faced two daunting questions. Who else should be given, and how much should everyone get? And then corporate welfare ran amok in the country, and so did political corruption, as all the political parties, especially the urban machines, ran to government to get all kinds of subsidies. What I discovered doing research for a subsequent book, a book that's not yet been published, is that the long succession of financial panics in the country, the boom and bust business cycle, as they are called, was not a business cycle at all. The long succession of panics, and to let your listeners know, there were financial panics and stock market crashes in 1792 and 1819, 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893, 1907, and this stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. The long succession of panics and crashes caused not by free market activities, but by corporate welfare policies alone created the need and the demand for social welfare reforms from the Progressive era to the New Deal and beyond. So there was never a need, never a warrant for social welfare until corporate welfare policies that ran amok destroyed the economy again and again and again. And people turned to government because they were more afraid of the quote unquote boom and bust business cycle than they were of government exceeding to more power and more power and more power. And that's how we got to where we are today.
So, but it seems to me that in the 20th century, the extremes of demand for more and more are coming from the social welfare sector rather than
Without a doubt.
the corporate. Yeah.
Certainly.
So there is
But no,
so there is a
well, that,
control somehow that came through lobbyists and
that
politicians.
is true. But don't forget, the lobbyists lobby on behalf of the corporations, on behalf of pharmaceuticals,
Yes,
on behalf
they
of
still
tech
do.
companies.
Of course. But
So it's a whole big mess.
but they seem to be pocketed in the economic sector, in the profit and loss portion of it, rather than the sociological changes that have taken place in the country that have come from the social influence. Those people who are dictating through government and through pressure what companies have to do, what individuals have to do. The whole woke situation is phenomenal, how it changed America. And it seems to be ebbing back now, but it had an enormous impact on economy and sociological change.
And still does. And we're in the grips of a fiscal crisis, with Social Security about to go bankrupt,
Yeah.
Medicare, Medicaid, and during the COVID pandemic, everyone was entitled to Medicaid. En masse, people just got on Medicaid, and no one's taking anybody off Medicaid.
And they got paid tremendously. And
Yeah.
in addition to that, tens of billions of dollars just disappeared.
Yeah,
Just were lost, flagrantly wasted, or fraud occurred. And then you have the people today who are arguing about these hundreds of millions of dollars that must be spent for the war machine in Ukraine and now the war machine in Israel. Certainly needs some assistance. But we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars without the fleck of an eye. And yet nobody's talking about how the impact would be on the loss of Social Security and Medicare to this country. Nobody's addressing that. They've been talking about it for 60 years, but they never came up with a solution. But every time somebody launches a rocket, you can send another $100 billion overseas and not know what happens to it. It disappears. It goes up in smoke like the war itself,
That's very true, and very, very sad and very dangerous. We have our eye completely off the ball. I think one sign, I'm not certain of this, but one sign would be rising interest rates on the bonds. In other words, government has had to raise its interest,
Right.
pay 5% now on 10-year bonds, almost 5% on 2-year, 3-year bonds,
Right.
so that the Federal Reserve now, they can pause. They don't have to, the Federal Reserve doesn't have to raise interest rates in order to slow down economy and combat inflation. But now the Treasury Department itself is raising interest rates because at the sums that it has to borrow to close its annual budget deficits,
Right.
the deficit is anticipated to be almost $2 trillion.
Now let's imagine this for a moment, where we've come to a place where this government, forget the GDP, that's all false anyway. We're talking about $2 trillion deficit, much of it owed to foreign players who are imposing interest rates on us, which we are raising that benefit them and we can't pay. Is this not the cat chasing its tail over and over again?
It is. and no one is paying attention to the issue, because we are involved in other areas of the world and other crises, Ukraine and Russia being one, Israel and the Muslim nations being another, Iran, and we are on the verge of a world war if China takes up Iran's side, because China is depending on Iran for its oil. So if we threaten Iran with any kind of action, because they are the sole backers of Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and everything, and if China threatens to come in on the side of Iran, if we bomb Iran's nuclear facilities or even its refineries, and if we bomb its refineries, or if Israel bombs its refineries, what that would do to the price of oil is crazy.
Okay,
Yeah,
so the Chinese have now sent a naval fleet to the Mediterranean. That's not they're en route right now. That is not a subtle threat. That is a definite statement of warning. And they joined into a non-aggression pact, the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. So they're in a non-aggression pact. They're doomed to support each other. And when this occurs, the Bible calls it Armageddon. That's what's coming.
well, at least we won't have to worry about inflation.
Yeah, right. We won't be rude.
This is getting deadly serious. Now, I did not hear that China is sending their fleet, and they have built up over the last few years a very powerful naval presence.
They now have the largest fleet in the world.
Yep.
Bigger than ours. And we have allowed ourselves to deplete our strategic and military readiness. I mean, let's go back to the oil situation. We now have as a reserve for wartime a 17-day supply.
Yep.
He's reduced it down to 17 days.
Yep, in a strategic petroleum reserve.
How irrational.
Yeah, and another thing that I read is that we had stores of hundreds of thousands of worth of ammunition, which was present in Israel for them to use if needed. Biden administration gave most of that away to Ukraine, took it out of Israel, gave it to Ukraine, not available for the Israelis.
I suspect that's why the Israelis have not gone into Gaza yet. I suspect they're being told by the U.S. government to hold back, and they're replenishing those supplies, and they're waiting. But I don't think they'll wait forever. It's amazing. It's amazing to me they haven't gone in already.
Yes, and well, also what's been reported is that while on the surface, Biden is saying the United States gives 1,000 support to Israel and everything they need, under the covers, he's telling Israel, don't you dare move. Don't you dare move and escalate this war. And that's very believable.
He is surrounded by
Look what it does to the issue you and I are talking about today.
Right. It puts it into the space somewhere where nobody's paying attention
to. Thing in anybody's mind is how limited government meant to be.
Right.
And by the way, if government were to be a protector and not a provider, if government was what it was meant to be, we could reduce taxes 75% without eliminating any essential services. Because right now, the national defense, law enforcement and justice, the civil courts, criminal courts, penal institutions, all of that represents under $800 billion of a budget in excess of $6 trillion.
Meaningless.
Peanuts. Nobody would complain about taxes.
Right.
If taxes were going for the protection of our lives, liberties, and property.
So what do you see happening with this, Jerry? I forget the war. We'll put that aside for a moment because we can hear that every 10 seconds, anytime we turn on any device.
Okay.
Let's
Here,
talk about your issue that you brought to the forefront here. How do you think this will change, if at all?
I don't know if anything will change. Americans are far more passionate about their sports teams and celebrity entertainers than they are about politics.
Absolutely.
Look at the championship series for the American League and the National League, and people go wild if a member of their team hits a home run.
Yeah.
I wish that they would be so excited about the right candidate winning public office and defeating an opponent who's crushing the country. Now, I can't tell you what will happen. Don't have a crystal ball. I can tell you what I hope will happen and what will serve to rescue the country. First of all, in 2024, to primary out many Democrats and many Republicans who oppose immediate cuts in federal spending. And when I say that, I mean candidates should come to the fore and specify which programs they will cut, which programs they will no longer pay for, which agencies they will close. Now, I would like to see the Department of Education closed.
Me too.
That would save $80 billion
Me
a
too.
year.
And so many children's lives.
And the Department of Education
Yeah.
isn't helping any school-age child. in America.
Disaster.
No one is benefiting from that. I would also like to see the Departments of Commerce, Agriculture, and Labor closed. All they have turned into were clientele agencies
Right.
that exist to benefit their respective constituents. We do not need that. That is corporate welfare run amok. So I would like to see candidates next year come with specific programs. Vivek Ramaswamy, I am displeased with his antics of late, but at least he has laid down a gauntlet and said he will close the administrative agencies. The fourth branch of government will starve for funds if he's elected president. That's what has to happen. Congress has to pass the laws. Right now, what Congress does is they pass broad legislative authority that
Yeah.
they turn over to the administrative agencies
Right.
who can use wide discretion in interpreting the will of Congress
Which is
and do everything they please.
unlimited bureaucracy. There's no
and it's
control.
placing such a burden on business, a stronger burden every day, a larger burden. So
Right.
that's the first thing, to have people running for public office, for federal government positions, for Congress, who say, elect me and I will close this agency, that agency, I will cut this program and that program. That's not enough to rescue the country, but it's a good first start.
And
The
then we have
second-
to have a group of people strong enough to hold their feet to the fire and see that they do it after they're elected. They make promises and do nothing.
That's right. And by the way, that's why most people don't give a hang about politics, because they are cynical about the political process and about politicians, because they've learned to be politicians.
Yeah.
They lie for a living.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They make and break promises for a living. So people throw their hands up and say, why should I bother? Why should I vote for him? I can't believe a word out of his mouth.
Oh,
And
you and
now,
I may differ on what I'm going to say now, but I think part of that is term limits. I think that the situation with term limits has gone to a place where you get young people voting into the House of Representatives, the best job they'll ever have in their life. They never have a job like that, and they come in with a net worth of $1 million and they save for 40 years and they come out with $80 million in their pocket and they do nothing for their people in the meantime. It's too much.
So different. We have a point of disagreement.
I know we do. I know you think they should stay.
Because first of all, with term limits, they know they can't run for office, so they're going to be even more beholden to the special interests who are lobbying them, because that's the companies, the corporations that are going to give them their positions as lobbyists or consultants after they leave public office.
But they can only get away with it for one term, and then they have somebody competing against them.
Term limit legislation lets congressmen run for 3 terms, 6 years, and Senate for 1 term or 2 terms, 12 years. But it doesn't matter. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, they know who's going to butter their bread after they leave Congress, so they're going to do the bidding of those. Also, my second objection is that fighting for term limit legislation, like fighting for Mark Levin's Convention of the States, like fighting for a fair tax or a flat tax or a balanced budget
It
amendment,
distracts from the real fight.
Distractions.
Yeah.
We have to get down to fundamentals.
Yeah.
The second thing is, besides from cutting specific programs, if we can get a handle on that, if we can start cutting and let Americans know that it's possible to shrink the size of government, that itself will be a mark of progress. And besides from the fact that it is a distraction, it's not dealing with fundamentals. Fundamentals would be thinking of government as a protector and as a provider. If people realize that every dollar a government spends has to be financed, and that a government that is big enough to give you anything you want is big enough to take everything you have.
Absolutely.
And people start seeing that there are public officials who are running for office who understand that and who are going to fight to shrink government, that can start a ball rolling that ends with the case against welfare. Again, the title of my book, Everything You Have, the Case Against Welfare. I first published that in 1980. The country hasn't caught up with me yet. But if we make that distinction between government and protector that we can't have across the board budget cuts. Not every function of government is equally useless. Some are valuable, like military, like law enforcement and justice. But if we make a frontal assault on the welfare state, beginning with corporate welfare, leaving Social Security and Medicare to the very end to deal with, but first getting rid of the administrative agencies and all the pork, bacon, earmarks, constituent services that are given out, that would be real progress. But ultimately, and this is why I wrote this article for the American Spectator, ultimately, to restore the American dream, we will have to retrieve the principles that made that dream possible in the first place. In other words, we have to realize how limited government was meant to be. And most of all, what Americans have to rediscover is that their earnings belong to them, not to society, so that Congress can take away and give away as much as it pleases. The people themselves own all the earnings that they have. It belongs to them. No one has the right to take that money away. And if government is reduced to being a protector, not a provider, and individuals realize that their money is their own to spend as they please, then we have a country. Then we return to the founding principles and the founders' conception of what America needs to be.
Big job to be done, especially when you have people who will hear this. And I agree with you 100%. There are people who will hear this and say we're a couple of racists and we don't want to give everybody an equal chance because of this and that and 300 years ago and retribution and all this stuff. When you look at what's happened in America today, you have so many millionaires that are Black people. You have so many people who have aspired to new cultures, built new businesses, aspired and succeeded, who are from different races and different nationalities and come to America and proven that it can work. But those who want to manage the narrative will never agree to that. They'll never acknowledge that. They'll say, no, but this and but that. We're racist. We're not racist. We're practical. You give a man a fish, you feed him for today. You teach him how to fish, and you feed him for his life. Let him do his thing.
The condition in the inner cities with all of the poverty and everything,
Terrible.
that is not a legacy of American slavery or American racism.
That's a legacy of American politics.
State.
That's a legacy of American politics.
Where there are no fathers in the home, there are no male role models, and you have, like Jesse Jackson himself said, you have children making children, babies making babies, and not being a role model. And worst of all, you have all welfare gives you is dependency. You do not have to lift a finger. You'll get all your food stamps, you get all your medical care, you get all your education. Everything is just given to you, and you wind up being 30 years old without a single credit on your resume.
Or a goal.
At work.
Or a goal in your heart. Nothing to aspire to because...
Exactly. But the problem is greater than you just stated, Carl, because the problem is to cut public spending is to take away the benefits that people expect. In other words, they're going to go to every farmer in the country and say, you're not getting any farm subsidies next year. Who's going to vote for that?
Yeah.
Who's going to vote for taking away food stamps from able-bodied young people in their 20s and 30s who can easily work, but they're not going to vote for anything that's going to take the food stamps away, or their medical care or anything. And who is going to tell young people that the government is not going to pay for their student loans? So that is, to me, that is the biggest problem. That to cut government is to cut government spending, is to cut government programs, is to cut off the aid that people are expecting and receiving. And that?
So that's a long-term goal. It took us generations to come to this mindset and to program people into thinking they were entitled to it. It may well take generations to reverse that, a little at a time, reducing, but starting with eliminating those bureaus that are absolutely useless for us to provide us with more opportunity to work and efficiently use those dollars. But it's going to take time. It's not going to come overnight.
I was hopeful that the 11,000 plus pipeline workers who lost their livelihood because Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yeah.
What happened to the right of those 11,000 plus to pursue their happiness? That's involved with the pursuit of happiness. And the American government said, no, you may not.
Yeah.
And they didn't protest that.
That's no different than when Hillary said to West Virginia, you'll just have to find new jobs.
Yeah.
You'll just have to find new jobs.
Or Obama and Biden saying, you'll get high-tech jobs in the computer industries.
Yeah, sure.
A coal miner teach him how to use AI.
Well, Jerry, as usual, we rapidly go through our time queue. And I'm always excited to talk with you because we get into these thoughts and these heady opportunities to discuss things that get my gray matter moving again. I have to do that very frequently these days. It seems to fall asleep in the middle of the day. I have to stir it up again. So I want to invite you again to come back. This is your third time, but we'll do it a fourth time, I promise you. And before we close off for the afternoon, any last words you'd like to say to the people?
You know something? Well, I'll say what I think is more encouraging than anything else. Not very encouraging, but at least more encouraging than much of what we had to discuss today. And that is the country's saving grace may just be that under 40% of the American people have attended college.
Right. They haven't
And
been,
that,
they haven't been skewed.
yeah, and given what is going on, especially in the Ivy League,
Yeah.
Yale and Harvard and Columbia, and even NYU, with these pro-Hamas protests that are getting out of hand.
And the educators supporting it.
Yeah.
Supporting it.
So few Americans have actually been skewed in their thinking by their college professors.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you, I used the word skewed and Jerry used the word skewed. Some of you may see an R in there somewhere, but we didn't say that. We didn't say that.
Granted, I'll sign my name to that. Yeah. The only other thing I would leave your listeners with, your viewers with, is the fact that I'm a contrarian. I think you can tell that by now. And I do believe that the one thing that might shake Americans out of their lethargy is struggle. The harder things become for the average American, and the easier it is to see that the root of the problem is political, not economic, political. Perhaps Americans, and perhaps this may happen by 2024. I think in Donald Trump, we have someone who can explain to Americans in language they understand how much trouble the country is in, and that it's the progressive woke agenda that is getting this country in the trouble it's in. And I'm hoping by then that there's enough pain to go around to wake people up and shake them out of their lethargy and get them involved in the political process in a good way. So I'll leave you with that bit of optimism.
Well, that is optimistic. And I think that any bit of optimism that we can believe into the future, I'm an optimistic man. I've lived too many years with pessimism, too many years with strife and turmoil, and seen battlegrounds all over the world. I'm optimistic. I believe that there's a bright future ahead of this country. I believe it's going to be hard to come by. We're all going to have to do our share. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and go to work. We're going to have to do what's necessary to support our families' needs and come up out of licking our wounds and feeling sorry for ourselves. But I believe it's there. It's possible. If we don't get into that third world war that we mentioned earlier today, we have an opportunity. But I also know that my grandfather fought in World War I, and the Spanish flu happened, and everybody said the world was coming to an end. And he came back, became an American citizen, and everything was better for him. And my father and his brothers had World War II to deal with. And the Axis power told everyone in the world they were going to take control of this world, and it was going to be stopped. And we fought against it. And we came over that. And the Soviet bloc said, we're going to stop it. And we came over that. This too will pass. If we hang together, and America is the strongest power on earth when it hangs together. Just remember 9/12, not 9/11. Remember 9/12.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
12.
Americans enlisted in the armed forces in numbers never equaled since World War II.
Right. And you couldn't buy a flag anywhere. They were all out in front of people's homes.
And there was a flag on every lamppost, on every porch, in front of every business, and on every antenna sticking out of every car. And what caused that is the simple idea that, oh no, not in my country, you don't. You are not going to harm my parents, my children, my wife, my husband, and America enlisted in the armed forces in droves.
And we can do that again.
Unfortunately, it might come to that again.
We can do it again. I believe it.
All the people on the terrorist watch list who are coming through the southern borders, and
Yes.
cells that might be organizing right now.
Right. Jerry,
If
we're
you
going to do this
want,
again. I promise you, because I love talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you love hearing him because he's a deep thinker and he's a clear thinker and he understands the real issues. You wipe away the cream cheese, you wipe away all the nonsense that people throw at you as diversion, and you listen to truth. That's the important. Listen to truth. We
by the way,
all,
let me say that I'm on Quora, Quora.com.
yes.
I answer questions on Quora.com. I have 2.3 million views, thousands of followers, and anybody can follow me there free of charge. Quora.com.
So you're going to find all of Jerry's contact information as usual at the end of the show. It'll all be listed how to reach him. You click on, it'll have a link to him. He's an open book. I know he's always willing to talk to people. You contact him with the most difficult question. If he doesn't know the answer, he'll get it for you. He's a wonderful man, and I love him, and I'm so glad he's here with us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you, I do this show every other Wednesday. We bring people like Jerry on to talk about the real issues of life. That's what it's meant when I say along the way, life's journey. We find things that have more importance than the Bobby Doll movie. We find things that are meaningful, and they are meant to inspire and motivate you to be bigger and better than you are. It did me, made me a better man to meet people like this and hear these stories and to aspire to be a better person. And I also remind you, you have your own story. I know you do. Everybody has their own story, and no one can tell it like you can. So write it down. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell the people you love, because when it's too late, it's too late. All that wisdom is gone. Share it with others. And if you want to come on the show, write in and tell us what your comments are and your story is. Never know. You might be out with Jerry and me. We'll be debating it together. Who knows? Right, Jeff? We'll be kind to them, won't we? Yes, we will.
All invited.
And the final thing I want to say is what I tell people every week. I know I'm this big, blustery Italian guy from Brooklyn, but there's a lot of truism in what I'm going to tell you. Get somebody you know today, grab them in a bear hug, and tell them you love them. Tell them you love them. It may be the only time they hear that. And it's important for them to know that they are loved by you, by God, and by our fellow brothers. Tell people you love them. That's it. That's all I got to say. Jerry, I love you today.
Thank you very much. I love you, Carl. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our next time.
Me too. Bye-bye, folks. Come back again.
Bye-bye.